The Bobby Allison story is an epic that features high banks and fast turns, both on the racetrack and in everyday life. As a stock car driver, Bobby Allison rates as one of the top performers in history. For more than 3 decades, he was a crafty and daring champion while competing, the winner of over 700 races on tracks of all sizes and shapes. His bumper-to-bumper confrontations with other superstars delighted a multitude of fans. Particularly on a Grand National circuit, he dominated at times. At present, he is an innovative owner who continues to find ways to make the Raybestos team car go faster without sacrificing the safety of drivers who desire to win like he did. But the Bobby Allison story is much more than checkered flags waving at the end of hard drives through the 4th turn and blistering sprints to the finish line. It personifies an American dream, a climb from pauper to prince, with every high bank and fast turn adding to the mystique of a master craftsman whose life should inspire anyone who dares to be great.
He got started under the shade of a tree at a time when he was young. He was determined to become a champion, a racing hero, in cars he built to run. Early on his mother offered objections, forcing him to use a fictitious name. But the world soon knew Bobby Allison as the leader of the Alabama gang.
His father said, "Now, son, if you're gonna race, you gotta be the best." Bobby nodded his approval. He told Pop he had passed the test.
Bobby Allison drove fast and hard, taking on the king in court. He flew past them on the straights to be a leader in a very fast sport. Checkered flags of victory flew out to greet him at almost every NASCAR track he ran. Fans all over loved to cheer this racing Alabama man.
He's different, outspoken. He's courageous and true.
The child who became a champion, doing what Bob told him to do. Then came that afternoon at Pocono, when the yellow flag was frozen by fear. The test of his life was at hand, his death was lingering near. Bobby Allison survived a tough crisis with the delight of his rivals and his fans. So continues the inspiring story of an unknown boy who became a famous man. His father said, "Son, if you're gonna race, you gotta be the best." Bobby nodded his approval and told Pop he passed the test. Bobby Allison drove fast and hard, taking on the king in court. He flew past them on the straights to be a leader in a very fast sport. Checkered flags of victory flew out to greet him at almost every
If I simply drove out to the racetrack, you know, paid my pit pass, got in there, took the headlights out, took the taillights off, and strapped the driver's door shut, which the rule said the driver's door had to be strapped shut. You had to have a seat belt, and that basically was the rule. First night, there were probably 40 cars showed up, and I finished about 7th, I think. Second night, there were probably 50 cars that showed up, and once again, I finished about 7th. Third night, probably 60 cars showed up, and I won. And I thought, boy, that shows the world that I'm going to be a racer. This has got to be it. Proof of the deal.
He was very, very fierce competitor. The only thing he knew was number 1. He never settled for number 2. He ran a lot of races and ran up 2nd or 3rd or 5th or whatever, but that wasn't his intention. And he ran just as hard the last lap as he would the first lap. And I don't think I've ever run against a competitor that was any tougher mentally or physically as far as being able to take whatever conditions were dished out. If it was hot, Bobby kept on going. A lot of us would pass out and they'd pull us out of the car. Bobby's still out there just digging. So
tenacious, I guess. Sort of one of those kind of people that reminds me of a turtle. He get a hold of you and he won't let go until, not necessarily a thunders or lightning. Somebody probably have to knock him off. Bobby was just, you know, a real intense kind of guy that real tenacious, real committed, and real strong-willed. And it was Bobby's way or no way at all.
What made Bobby a great driver, he was a real innovator. He did a lot of own chassis work himself, and he didn't stay in one spot one time. He went all over the country racing. He understood everything. He just didn't get good at one location. He was good everywhere. He even ran an IndyCar one time. So Bobby's very diversified, although he put his heart and soul in the NASCAR Winston Cup, and number 1 in my book.
Bobby could do anything to a race car. There's nothing about a race car he didn't know, and that's why he was so good. He could work on it, build it, maintain it, whatever. And that's why Bobby was so good, and that's why Bobby was winning races, you know, at 52 years of age, where a lot of other guys by then their careers have taken the downturn. And so it didn't matter whether he had a wrench in his hand or trying to decide which fork was the right one at a state dinner at the White House with the president. He knew which one to pick up. He knew what to do, and he was just a common guy.
It's hard to rate people in his category. He's already up there. He's not a 5 or 10. He's up there with the best of them. And you know, he and Richard Petty and A.J. Fortin. I've got a lot of good friends in racing that are up there. Rick Mears and just a lot of people like that. And I don't rate them. They're all number 1 with me.
I remember as a kid traveling with him, and I remember at an early enough age where I was standing up in the seat of the truck beside him as we were driving down the road towing a race car to the racetrack. I don't remember what racetrack, I just remember being there. And to me, he always was just my dad. You know, there never was a time as a kid that I thought any different than that. And it was after I was all the way grown up to in my early 20s before I realized one day, you know, there's something different about this situation than most of them. Traveling around the country, you know, maybe in my late teenage years even, but I traveling around the country, going to different racetracks, and people would ask where I was from, and I would say Hueytown, Alabama, and they'd come back to me and they'd say, well, Hueytown, Alabama, isn't that where Bobby Allison is from? And I'd look at them and I'd say, yeah, that's where Bobby Allison's from. And they'd say, well, do you know him? I said, yeah, I've known him all my life. He's my dad.
I've known Bobby Allison since about 1960. And I think one of the greatest things you can say about an athlete is as they grow in stature, what happens to them? As they become more popular with the fans and more popular, and they become the tip of everybody's tongue. Well, as far as Bobby was concerned, he's the same man now that he was in 1960, that he was in 1970, in 1980, in 1990. He never changed. He always had time for the fans. He always had time for the news media. He always had time for his family. And he's just an individual that stardom didn't go to his head.
You know, for me to win the Daytona 500 at age 50 with my son second, you'd have to go a long, long ways to top that regardless. And why that won't come back, or why it hadn't come back yet, I don't know. I still hope that someday somebody makes the right comment and all of a sudden there it is. I'm there trying to wipe my face, and the safety crew gets up there to me. Come on, we got to get you out of here, and we got to get you into the ambulance. And my first thought was, well, you know, how many people got hurt back there in the stands? You know, I knew that the wreck had come very close to the grandstand, if not, had not entered the grandstand.
We got him to run an in-car camera at Michigan. And this is back when in-car cameras were relatively new. And so I had some gloves made and had the Miller logo put on the back of the hand, so when he held on the steering wheel, he had a little free advertising on television. I knew Bobby didn't like gloves, didn't wear them, but I, you know, kept telling him so. I handed him these gloves before the race, and, you know, he says, I'm not going to wear those. I said, Bobby, you got to do it for a sponsor. You know, we got to have this. I'm not going to do it. And I said, okay, jump in my car. We're going to a tattoo parlor. We're going to do the back of your hands then, because you're going to give us some Miller. So he said, well, okay, between the two, I'll take the gloves. So he puts the gloves on. First caution, they're showing in the car, and you can see Miller on the gloves and everything. The camera switches for a few minutes, and it comes back, bare hands. I asked him after the race what happened. He said, I told you didn't like the gloves. I put them on just so you'd shut up and leave me alone. He said, I figured once I got out there on the racetrack, you couldn't do anything about it. He said, so I took them off under caution, threw them out the window going down the backstretch. And then to make matters worse, there were a pair of gloves that I got from his shop. He sends me a bill for $100 for the gloves he threw away. So, but that's just the kind of guy he was.
We flew from Martinsville down to Charlotte just to see my crew chief, Doug Richard, when I was driving for Austin to race. He's going to drive that night. And we hopped in an airplane, flew down there, and went over to Metrolina and watched Doug race, jumped back to his airplane. I had my girlfriend, Teresa, at that time, we weren't married with me, and she got back in the airplane. We'd take off, and we were going out over Charlotte. We'd do an aileron roll. He rolls the airplane upside down with the lights and everything. It was beautiful. And my Teresa was all nervous and scared, and we got on up over Greensboro, and we went the other way and unrolled it. So we had a good time.
I'm surprised he's alive after seeing the way I saw him the first couple of days, first couple of weeks after the wreck. But what it tells you is everything I knew about him. He is, and every Allison has this characteristic. They are the most stubborn people you've ever met in your life. And that is a positive trait. They won't be beat on a racetrack, or in this case, Bobby wasn't going to die. He just absolutely refused to die. And what would have killed most people wasn't going to kill Bobby Allison.
I learned a lot from Bobby, and I also learned it from him that the car has to do all the work, and the driver's got to be the guy that makes that decision what the car is going to do. And it was always important. And he taught me when I was starting out that in Nashville, when we were building cars down at his place, that you got to know what to change on the car if you're going to win races. You can't just jump in it and ride in it. You got to figure out what's wrong with it and fix it. And so I really went to school on him a lot. You know,
I'm just happy to see him come back as a friend, have my friend back, and you know, he's been a good part of my career. When I was a rookie, I'd come up and ask him things, and gosh, he'd say, boy, you get a little green here, you need to do this, do that. And he come over to me at Daytona, him and his brother Donnie, and said, you need to run that thing a little smoother in the draft. You're jerking it around, so you're going to wreck you and all of us with you. So, you know, and his advice is good advice. He always had good advice for you, and he does today for young drivers that talk to him, and he can give you some good advice. He knows a lot about what he's doing.
I know he talks about maybe getting in and going around one lap, possibly, you know, just to say that he did it, or to run one race. I don't know. I just might have to wait and see, because probably if I said my own feelings, I would be selfish, and I would say, no, I don't want him to race anymore.
He got started under the shade of a tree at a time when he was young.
Bobby Allison got hooked on auto racing by watching cars on short tracks in the Miami area with his grandfather. He was still in high school when he took a 38 coupe to a racetrack and began competing. The memorable year was 1957. His friends ridiculed him a bit when he drove the numbered car to class, but that added to his determination to make it. When his mother objected to him competing in what she perceived as a dangerous sport, he found a way to fool her. The boy known as Bobby Allison used an alias at the racetrack.
I had to have my parents' consent because I wasn't 21. In fact, I was just 17. And so I went to Mom and I said, Mom, I really need you to sign this paper for me so that I can go run this race Saturday night. And Mom, come on, it won't hurt anything, and it's organized racing, and, you know, the race is Saturday night. Well, she signed the paper thinking that she was signing for one Saturday night, and I was thinking that she was signing it for 100 years. And, you know, so I went and raced. Well, the next week said, wait a minute. You know, you can't go race that car. Oh, yes, ma'am. Yeah, I got to go run. Oh, no, if you're going to live here, you're going to go to school and, you know, get your education and do things right. Well, as I looked at the whole picture, it seemed really easy to me to just change my name in the racing. That way I could live at home, you know, where things were nice and comfortable and so forth. And it didn't matter what name I had racing. You know, I had one and really wanted to win again, but I didn't see where there was any, you know, any real strong reason to have to be a certain name person to go race and go win. And so my oldest sister wasn't married yet, but she was dating a guy that was a friend of mine by the name of Bob Sundman, S-U-N-D-M-A-N. Well, I guess they did get married along about there somewhere. Well, Bob and I were kind of friends, and so I borrowed Bob's NASCAR license to go sign in with at the pits, and that's where the newspaper would get their information of who was doing the driving. Well, the chief steward at the track kind of knew what the deal was, and so he changed the Bob Sundman to Bob Sunderman. And that kind of was working okay, you know. That was allowing me to live at home and go ahead and get in the pit area and get in the race car. My dad came to me one afternoon and he says, let me tell you something. He said, if you're determined to race, you go ahead and do it, but you use your own name. And he said, you know, I know what's going on, but the wrong people will think the wrong way about it. So use your own name and just make sure you do right. And so I went back to Bobby Allison.
In 1959, with both his mother and father supporting his efforts in auto racing, Bobby Allison and his brother Donnie Allison loaded a race car on a trailer and drove to Alabama. They had heard that the competition was keen and the racetracks were impressive. And by all means, the young men with shallow pockets and empty stomachs were delighted to discover something else majestic about their journey to the north.
We came into Montgomery, and Bo Freeman, we pulled into his station, and Bo Freeman introduced himself. And, you know, let's have a glass of tea, and then let's go out here, and well, I'll show you Montgomery Speedway. We did that, saw this speedway that was just mind-boggling. It was so neat compared to anything that I'd seen through Florida. And I'd roamed around Florida a little bit, hunting places to race. Anyway, we're standing there, and the promoter comes walking out and says, we race here tomorrow night, but they're running up at Dixie Speedway in Birmingham tonight. So, boy, we jump in the truck and come to Birmingham. And I run 5th in the heat race, 5th in the semi-feature, and 5th in the feature. And we had been eating peaches for about a day and a half because our budget had gotten low enough that we barely had enough gasoline in the pickup truck to pull the car to wherever that next track was going to be, and certainly weren't going to waste any of our money that we may need to race with on food. And so you could buy a big basket of peaches along the road for 50 cents back then. And we had eaten peaches for about a day and a half. Well, I went to that pay window and told Donnie, I said, well, we'll go pick up our couple bucks and we'll go somewhere and sleep in the truck on the way back down to Montgomery. Went up to the pay window, and they counted me out $135. 5th, 5th, and 5th. $135. I said, wow, man, I have died and gone to heaven. Went down to the truck and I said, Donnie, we don't have to sleep in the truck tonight, and we're going to go over there to that Miss Mary's drive-in that we saw coming in and have us one of them $1.95 T-bones. Went and did that. About halfway down to Montgomery, found one of the old roadside motels and climbed in that bed and slept in a bed for the first time in 3 days.
It was in Montgomery, not long after the Birmingham experience, that Bobby Allison had 2 pivotal performances in his career. The first came after he finished first in 4 preliminary races leading to a feature event.
Sat on the pole, won the heat, won the semi, won the pursuit race, but Sonny Black figured out how to beat me in that feature and really taught me a super lesson that I think helped me through my whole career. Taught me that you can win without doing a thing wrong to the other guy. You just don't give them the road. Make them go the hard route. And that's what he did to me, and he stayed in front of me for the whole 30 laps that night, and I finished second in that feature. Never resented that a bit. Real early on said, that man did not do a thing but show me that you can take something and win a race by doing a good job.
The second came when he stayed up all night to repair a blown engine, then hustled to the track in Montgomery to compete.
I stayed there and worked on my car, got to Montgomery in time to start last in the feature, won my first feature race of my career.
In 1960, Bobby Allison discovered a checkered flag of another type, a winner of a woman and his future wife. No doubt, Judy Allison has been instrumental in his career since appearing with her sister and Ralph Stark in a parking lot of a racetrack.
He had the pickup truck parked next to Ralph's pickup truck, and his wife came out of the stands, and along with his wife was this cute little blonde-haired girl. And so we always stopped at a little drive-in restaurant and had a sandwich or something after the races, and they were there. And so I just said to her, how about if I take you home? Okay, so she jumped in the pickup with me, and I drove her home. And that was our first date. And I guess she had to be 15, close to 16 at the time, but no more than that. But I just had that special feeling with her from right to begin with. And she seemed to have confidence in what I was doing. I went through lots of days where a lot of people would ask, what are you doing? you know, trying to get to that next success deal. But she seemed to have the confidence in me that, you know, that I could go ahead and succeed at this particular business.
The success came quickly. Bobby Allison won 30 feature events in 1960, then followed with that many more in 1961. He won 45 feature events and the National Modified Championship in 1962. Thus was the start of the Alabama gang that has been so prominent on the NASCAR circuit.
First of all, let me organize that deal. Donnie came with me the first week. Gil Hearn came up with Kenny Andrews. Gil Hearn went home the second week. Donnie started racing the second week. I went home at the end of the second week, and I had known Red in Miami. I had worked for Red before I ever drove the Sportsman modified cars. Really admired Red, really liked him. Went to Red and said, Red, I died and went to heaven. I found a place where the racetracks are gorgeous, the fans are really super, and the purses are really big compared to what we're used to in South Florida. Red had some vacation time coming, and so he took his vacation, loaded his car up behind his old station wagon on the old drive-on trailer, and followed me back to Alabama. We had a 2-weekend deal with a holiday in between where we ran 8 times in 7 consecutive days. Red won 7 of those features. And he agreed with me that we had died and gone to heaven. As we began to roam around, which was the thing that really turned me on, if I heard a race somewhere 300 or 400 miles away, that was nothing. I mean, that's why I had that good tow truck, and it was only a pickup truck, but it was a pickup truck that had a pretty good running engine and a good towing trailer, and I could get on the highway and I could be at some racetrack a few hundred miles away in a matter of a few hours. And so we began to venture out, and then people began to kind of associate us from coming from Alabama to wherever their track was. And that's how we got originally referred to as the Alabama gang. We'd go traveling around. Chattanooga had a track, and there was a little track up north of Knoxville, Tennessee, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. There was a track at Columbus, Georgia. There was the track, of course, at Montgomery and Pensacola, track over at Memphis. We'd come roaming in, and we had a reputation for wherever we showed up, we ran really good, you know. One of the 3 would be a potential winner of the feature, and there were times when we did run 1, 2, 3. And so we'd come rolling in, and they'd say, uh-oh, here's that Alabama gang again.
Bobby Allison drove fast and hard, taking on the king and court. He flew past them on the straights to be a leader in
The man named Stoker made his Winston Cup circuit debut in 1961 at Daytona in a Chevrolet built by Ralph Stark. It was not a dynamite appearance, to say the least.
It was really kind of cute because we worked and worked on that thing and really tried to anything we could think of to make it go a little bit faster, because every few laps here would come the Fords and the Pontiacs and go zooming by to put me yet another lap down. But I did end up running the whole race, which, you know, I was at least pleased that I had accomplished getting to the finish line.
Bobby Allison appeared in 2 other Winston Cup circuit races that season, at Charlotte and Atlanta. And it was not until 1964 that he reappeared in that type competition. He was doing quite well on short tracks and was a major force in the super modified division. In the back of his mind was a yearning to someday drive in the Indianapolis 500. But in 1964, Bobby Allison made a decision that changed the face of car racing. He decided to make it or go bust in a stock car. When he showed up in 1966 in a strikingly light Chevelle with a small 327 engine, skeptics chuckled.
That was the first front steer car. You know, just, I had to make that stuff up, and took a lot of hours to make the one side of the suspension, but it only took me about 3 hours to make the other side, and I just copied what I did in reverse.
Actually, the man from Hueytown, Alabama was starting to reshape more than the mechanics of auto racing. He was changing the order of merit on the Winston Cup circuit. In early June of 1966, he took his first victory in Oxford, Maine, just after breaking an axle in Maryland and blowing up engines in Virginia and New York.
Went across to Boston, Massachusetts, went in a Chevy dealer there, and asked to buy a Corvette block assembly. And the parts man said, well, we don't have a new one in here, but there's one out there on the junk pile that came out of a car, you know, on a warranty deal. Well, I went out and looked, and it had everything I needed. So I bought it for $50. Went to Oxford, Maine. There was a little Chevy dealership diagonally across the street from Oxford Speedway. Went in there, worked through the night, prepared that engine, got it put in the car, went over to Oxford Speedway, and won my first race of my Winston Cup career.
Then came 4 days that put his savvy to the test. 2 hard races within 96 hours that indicated a man of modest means could become a superstar.
After Oxford, the next stop on the Northern Tour back then was across to Fonda, New York, where they had a half-mile dirt. Well, I wasn't into dirt racing very much anyway, but you had to do that if you were going to run the Grand Nationals back then. And so across to Fonda we go. Well, in Fonda they have a giant crash, and I was the center of attraction. When they got the car pulled back to the pit area, it was 27 inches short, I believe it was. 27 inches short compared to what it was supposed to be. I was heartbroken. Here we're miles and miles from home. I had just won my first victory of my career, and now my car looked like it belonged on the junk pile. I have a cousin, Dave Demarest, who lives in the New York City area, New Jersey side, you know, New York, New Jersey. And I called, he worked for a body shop at the time. Called him up, Dave, we wrecked really bad, and we need, you know, we're going to need to straighten the car, but we're going to need some material and all. And he said, all right, tell me what body parts you think we need. I'll round the stuff up, get a little rest, and get on down here tomorrow morning. So we did, went ahead and got a little rest and got on down to Dumont, New Jersey, and we worked through the night. Got the car fixed, got it pulled out. It wasn't pretty, but the wheels were in the right place, and the fenders were in the right place, and got the thing loaded on the truck and took it to Islip, Long Island. Pulled into Islip, and John Bruner Sr., who was the chief steward back in those days, walked up to me and said, I just told Daytona we'd never see this thing again. And I said, well, it ain't pretty, but here it is. So, okay. So got started in that race, went on and won it. So just had to be a super, super week-long period. You know, had highs and lows, you know, had the wins, had the destruction of the car, the rebuild, and the next win. Just had to be neat.
Thus was the start of one of the greatest rivalries in sports history, Bobby Allison versus Richard Petty, a hot war that has resulted in mutual respect. For instance, consider how the king reacts to the name Bobby Allison.
It was one of the deals that when Bobby came along, he had won a couple of modified championships, and then he moved into the Winston Cup circuit. I think he'd run a few races, but really when he said, okay, I'm going to go to the Winston Cup and do it, he came in as a completely independent situation and owned his own car, worked on his own car, towed his own car, the whole deal. By then, I was winning about everything there was to win, so naturally the one that he had to beat to win races was me. And we had a little trouble to begin with back in, I don't know, 67 or 68 or some kind of deal, when he first came with his little Chevelle. And, you know, that sort of got things started, I guess. And you know, for 2 or 3 years there, not that we didn't speak and talk and stuff like that, but when it came down to the end of the race, it was always Bobby Allison and Richard Petty. And not always, but a lot of times it was Richard Petty and Bobby Allison. And then he drove for Holman and Moody, and we had a little confirmation. And then when he got to driving for Junior, I guess it really exploded. We wound up running Martinsville and running into each other a couple times, and I wound up winning the race, and you know, that didn't set too good. We went back to Wilkesboro the next week. So happened, come down 3 or 4 laps to go, the only 2 cars that was racing each other was Bobby and myself. We started framming and banging again. The thing that the people don't understand or don't look at, I don't think, is that we never intentionally knocked each other out of the race. We knocked them out of the groove, but we never said, okay, I'm going to just wipe him out and just tried to knock him out. All I wanted to do was hit him enough to get him out of the groove so I could pass him. Only thing he ever hit me was just hard enough to get me out of the way so that he could pass me. So, you know, I guess it finally came to a head at Wilkesboro. If it had been another lap, neither one of us would won the race because neither car was able to make it back. Flat tires, fenders bending. Like, the only way you could turn the car was going out and hit the wall and bounce off of it. That's how bad it was. And, you know, it went on for, I guess, arguing and stuff in the newspapers and stuff for a week or 2. And then me and Bobby both finally said, hey, we've got to call a halt to this. So we didn't sit down. I think we just met each other and said, look, you know, we got to forget this because we're going to ruin our car owners, we're going to ruin our reputations, and the whole deal that you can't race. We're not racing, we're beating on each other. So we sat down and had basically a truce, and since then it's been all uphill or downhill or whatever. It's all been on an even keel. There's not many people I have more respect for from the race car drivers than Bobby Allison, because, you know, he said, okay guys, you know, I'm looking at it, this is the end of it, and he meant it, and he's done everything he can and all the races after that to make sure that he went by his word, and I really appreciate that part of it.
And consider how the great one reacts to the name Richard Petty.
They're probably really glad that they wouldn't let us carry guns. You know, there's probably a lot of people that feel that we were that big of rivals. Now, I got to say, for a while, that we were really, really strong rivals. That, you know, maybe I even resented just a little bit that he had great equipment and he had a big entourage of employees and supporters to help get all the work done and that kind of thing. And I thought, you know, I got to be on the defensive here. But still, it was a deal that he had done well enough and did it within the boundaries enough that proved to me it could be done.
They are friends now, but there was a time when they were anything but that, particularly after a confrontation in Islip, New York, during July of 1968.
Yeah, a couple of times, you know, that it didn't end when the checker flag went down. We were at a little deal at Islip, Long Island one night. This was, I guess, a couple of years after I had won my first couple of races, you know, and had won at Iceland. And we were in a deal where, the way I remember it, Richard was leading the race. And I was running second, but he was coming to lap me. And, you know, the flagman gave me the move over flag and all, but I was in pretty heavy traffic. And being that he was first and I was second and he had a whole lap lead on me, I felt like, you know, he could wait just a second and then I'd get out of his way. And so I held my finger up, just a minute and I'll move. And to teach me that you don't do that to him, he thumped me. Gave me a pretty good hit, but it bent his fender in on his tire. And while he was in the pits getting the fender pulled off the tire, I went on and won the race.
He says that he didn't get out of my way, he was waiting to get out of my way, and I says that ain't the way it happened. But it did happen, okay? But that was in Islip, New York, back in, you know, in the mid-'60s sometime. And that was really the beginning of the feud situation, because Bobby had just come with his new Chevelle and, you know, little independence operation, and they looked at us as we was the big King Kong. We had the factory behind us and all that stuff, you know, and just as if we went down and bought the car and it was ready to go and we didn't have to work on it. But it wasn't that way. But anyhow, that was the appearance that was trying to be portrayed. But the deal was, like I say, we was getting ready to lap him for the second or third time. And the deal was we was running on a fifth of a mile track, and there's not a whole lot of room. And it's been so long I really don't remember what happened. I might have pushed the issue, and I might not have pushed the issue. Anyhow, we did collide and knock me out, and he wound up winning the race, which made it even worse. If he'd wound up running fifth, it probably wouldn't have been quite as bad. But being I got knocked out and he did win the race, then we didn't look at it too favorably. You can bet on that.
When the race got over with, I got the trophy in victory lane. We came down through the outside pit area, you know, where the cars were being loaded and all. And one of his guys stepped out from between two trucks and hit me. And when I went down on the ground, another one of his crewmen began to kick me. But I kind of shook loose from there good enough, and my dad's Aunt Mildred was there. And Aunt Mildred was, as I remember it, she must have been close to 90 then. She was close to 6 feet tall, probably weighed 200, 225 pounds, and had a purse that probably weighed 10 pounds, and she waded into those guys, whooping them with that purse, and really helped end the fight right then and there.
Obviously, Bobby Allison and Richard Petty shared bitter moments, even as their sons, Davey and Kyle, played football together on racetrack infields. Thankfully, most of them have occurred on asphalt, at times with fellow drivers reminded to stay out of their way when nerves got on edge.
One instance at Talladega, me and him was racing, and we got to running side by side, and I run him down the infield, and he run me up in the wall. Anyhow, we was running, and first thing I knew, Pete Hamilton got involved in the thing, and I think we wound up knocking him in the wall. But anyhow, you know, just that was one of the last deals but that was not a deal where we was racing each other. We didn't hit each other, we didn't touch each other. It was just a deal that everybody's trying to take as much line as they could. That was a close race at Talladega. Bobby wound up winning the race, and I ran second, and Pete was back in the corner somewhere. He ran third.
Checkered flags of victory flew out to greet him.
He was just a man in that race car. He was just a man, and there's nobody out there that was a more macho kind of guy that you couldn't get away with anything with Bobby, because he was just as good as you were and could get you back, so why mess with him? You know, race him clean, race him hard. Now, when they came down that last lap, and I can remember at Talladega, I mean, think about it, this is before restrictor plates, and they're running 212, 215. I remember seeing him come off turn 4, and he was smoking all 4 tires, standing on the gas, going for it. And, you know, if he'd hit the wall, it'd have been okay, because he was going for it. He gave everything he had, and he was going to race you on that last lap. He was going to do whatever it took.
During more than 2 decades behind the wheel in the Winston Cup circuit, Bobby Allison won 84 events, including 65 between 1971 and the summer of 1988. He picked up checkered flags on superspeedways an incredible 52 times, including 4 in a row on 2 occasions. He failed to win on only 1 track on the Winston Cup circuit, at Martinsville, where he came close on many occasions. A record like that does not come by accident.
He was a tough competitor. You was talking about stubborn. Yeah, he's stubborn. He'd race you down to the end and right to the last minute, and he'd do what it ever took to win. And he is a tough competitor to beat on a racetrack 1-1. And there's never a dull moment racing him. He'd race down in one corner, and he'd get by, and you try to get back by him, and you know, stuff like that. He's just a all-around fun person to be around, and a good competitor to race against.
Both drivers and fans recognized his daring ways while competing on high banks and through fast turns, or sliding through the infield and bouncing off a wall. Among those admirers was former President Ronald Reagan, who after a national championship season in 1983 invited Bobby Allison and Judy Allison to the White House for a memorable state dinner and a painful party.
We had been invited down to the White House. We had already gotten to to New York when we got the invitation to come to the state dinner at the White House with President Reagan and Nancy and the whole group down there. Went and rented a tux there in New York. Got my bow tie and my cummerbund and the whole deal. And the guy reached up on the shelf and got me a pair of shoes. What size do you wear? Put that box of shoes in the bag that the rest of the tux and all were in. And we had arranged to go use Mike Curb's apartment to get dressed for the state dinner. And I got in there and we're getting ready, and I get my pants on and my shirt and my jacket, and I reach down and get my shoes. And I get the shoes, and I discovered that the guy in New York had recognized that I had 2 left feet, because I put my left foot in the shoe and I put my right foot down, and there was another left shoe. And you can't imagine what it's like to have on a pair of you know, roughed up old suede short boots as your other shoes, and be looking at going to a state dinner in a formal deal in a tuxedo and only have 1 shoe that you can wear. And there was no way that I could get that other left shoe to accept my right foot at all. And we're at Mike Curb's apartment, and his sister was there. And so I said to her, Mike is a pretty tall fella, you know, he's probably 6'1" or 2, so he should have some shoes that should be somewhere around what I could wear. So she said, well, here's a pair that, you know, and they're the patent leather shoes that go with the tux and all that. But Mike has really small feet. He's a big, tall man, but he's got very small feet. Here are the shoes. And they were like size 7.5. And I'm going to tell you, you put a pair of 9.5 feet and 7.5 shoes, we got them in there. But boy, was that work. And boy, was that painful. And we went to that state dinner and really, really struggled. I had to stay sitting down, but I was afraid to take them off for fear I wouldn't get them back on. But late in the evening, a few people felt it was strange that I did not dance with my wife or Nancy Reagan, who asked me, or a couple of the other really nice ladies that were there. And Judy and I finally got in the taxi and went back to the shuttle back to New York. When I got to that taxi, boy, those shoes came off in a hurry.
He's different, outspoken. He's courageous and true.
The child who became a champion.
He was always fair on the racetrack. He had a lot of tough battles and a lot of rivalries with different people, but he was always fair. And the thing that sets him apart from the majority of them, in the biggest way, I think, is he always had time for other people, no matter how busy he was. If somebody walked up to talk to him, he would take time out right then to talk to him. And if it was at a point where he really needed to be doing something, he would tell them, look, you know, I want to spend some time and talk to you, but we need to do it at another time. I've got a lot of work I need to do right now. And that was a great example for me, too. And I've tried to follow him in that respect in a direct way.
Like him, love him, dislike him, or wonder about his outspoken ways, Bobby Allison has always been a sportsman who is not afraid to speak his piece. There have been times when NASCAR officials cringed while reacting to something he said, but they let their apprehension pass because he is a winner who gives back to the sport almost all he has received from it. The same viewpoint is held by many of his fellow drivers.
At times there was resentment between, you know, Bobby and I. I think Bobby felt like I won the championship 2 years in a row, kind of come from behind and beat him 2 years in a row, and I know it didn't thrill him. And he finally won the thing in '83, and I felt, you know, I was glad he won it. He probably doesn't believe that, but I was, and I've always admired Bobby. I admired him for just being who he is, that he doesn't try to fall into the mold or the character of somebody in the past. When you talk about people in our sport Bobby stands out, and he's different from some of the others.
Perhaps being different in the case of Bobby Allison is synonymous with being committed and being confident, as well as not being so single-dimensional that auto racing consumes his life. He is a devoted family man who is just as comfortable on a pew inside a church as behind the wheel. He is an inventor who developed a de-icing mechanism for aircraft, which falls in line with his passion for flying a private plane. And an innovator who, among other noteworthy things, brought power steering and floorboard fans to auto racing. He dabbles in politics. He gives his time freely to charitable causes, especially youths in need of breaks. And as always, he takes time to visit with his fans who have come to adore his unusual style.
In one of the races that he had won here in Talladega, and I believe it was the '86 race with the car that's sitting right behind us, you know, after the race, after victory lane and all the ceremonies go on, then they take the driver and with a police escort and they bring him up to the press box for the media, and usually that interview period is around 2 hours. So, and usually the victory lane ceremonies are about 30 or 40 minutes. So at this particular race, you're talking about now after the victory lane, after all the media has spoken to him and after all the TV has made all their pictures and videos and everything. And this particular time, as Bobby walked out of the press box, is a two-story box, there was a group of people waiting there for him. And one of this group was a young man that I've known since a long time, went to the School for the Deaf and Blind. And he was a deaf young man. He was about 18 years old. And he was a tremendous Bobby Allison fan. So he was going to have an opportunity to see his hero. And he, as Bobby walked down the stairs, he was kind of the first one right in line, been waiting over 2.5 hours after the race just to see him. But he couldn't speak. So he was wearing a hat, this young boy, and Bobby Allison had a hat, said Allison 22 on it. So the guy kind of hugged Bobby, trying to congratulate him, and he started crying. And it didn't take long for Bobby to realize that he couldn't speak, that he was deaf. So Bobby took his hat off and kind of told him in his own way, let's change hats. So Bobby took his hat off, signed it, put it on his little boy's head, and took this young man's hat and put it on. And, you know, that was probably the highlight of this young man's life, that Bobby Allison could understand him. He had just some kind of something in between them worked that he understood. He was a great fan. They changed hats, and this young man ended up with a Bobby Allison hat signed personally. That was one particular incident I'll never forget that happened here at Talladega. He had a terrible crash here. You know, he hit the fence at 200 miles an hour, tore a tremendous amount of fence down.
And I was on the outside pole at 210 miles an hour. And I was really pleased with that. Well, the race started and we came down through the trioval, and I felt a thump, and with that, the car reared up in the air, went into the fencing, and began a series of crashing spins. I could tell that it was tearing the catch wire down, but I couldn't tell how much else damage it was doing. I could tell that the wreck was going on, and this thing was a lot worse than I wanted to be. In the middle of it, I got a face full of oil where the dry sump tank had been, I guess, torn open, ruptured or whatever, and that spilled a lot of oil on me. It wasn't hot enough to burn me, but it was totally blinding. I'm sitting there and the race car stopped. Then as it stopped, yet another car hit me and spun me around some more. Stopped again, and I'm sitting there, and I've got oil all over me and all on my eyes and all on my goggles, so I can't see. So I said, how many people are hurt back there? And they go, oh, nobody's hurt there. Just, you know, come on, we got to get you in the ambulance. So I got in the ambulance, and then they started around the track the same way that the race cars go. Now, there's a lot of sense to doing it that way if the event is going on at all. But the event had already been red flagged because the crash was so bad. And I was aware of that. And when we started around the racetrack, that direction, I said to myself, boy, there's got to be dead people laying all over the place over there. You know, and I really felt bad about that. I was really alarmed. And I really was feeling bad about that. And the ambulance driver finally got to the infield hospital, and Dr. Hardwick walked up and looked in the ambulance and said, shut off the helicopters, we don't need them. And to me, that was probably the best piece of news that I could hear, because I didn't need the helicopter, but when they shut them off, that meant nobody else did either.
Fast turns, old Bobby let it rip through traffic, and running along he made races a fast trip. At times he was going 200, at times he slowed still. You could always hear the thunder when Mr. Allison was there. Hey, it never mattered what the decals on his car said. On the yellow and red, you could always count on a pedal push to the steel, cause old Stoker knew that his fans paid for the thrills. Through those high banks and fast turns, old Bobby went up and down. Through those hard times in his life, he kept going round and round. But those high banks he soared, inspiring a new breed of drivers whose challenge is to do more. It never mattered what the decals on his car said. Green flags were checkered under yellow and red. You could always count on a pedal push to the steel, cause old Stoker knew that his fans paid for the thrill. Paid for the thrill. Go on, Stoker. Checkered under yellow and red. You could always count on a pedal push to the steel, cause old Stoker knew that his fans paid for the thrill. Hey, it never mattered what the decals on his car said. Green flags were checkered under yellow and red. You could always count on a pedal push to the steel, cause old Stoker knew that his fans paid for the thrill.
In 1983, after years of coming close, Bobby Allison won his only Winston Cup Points Championship in an intriguing battle with Darrell Waltrip. The celebration came at Riverside after a topsy-turvy season that started with the eventual champ wrecking 2 cars at Daytona.
It was a tough year. I started the year off with a horrendous crash in Daytona, backed into the 4-turn wall on the inside wall coming out of 4 there, and I struggled that year. And we got ourselves back in contention, as we always did, seem to, and you know, Bobby ended up beating us by a little bit there. But we've had some great battles through the years, and we've competed hard against each other through the years. And I guess, you know, it all comes down to where we are today, not where we were then. And I think where we are today is we have a better appreciation for each other than we probably did then. I think I respect him more now, and hopefully he feels the same way.
Bobby Allison experienced a demanding grind getting his Miller High Life car through the season. There were unusual flat tires, uncanny accidents, and at Riverside, sugar in his gas tank after he finished the race in good enough standing to wrap up the championship. In reflection, it was a skillful Miller High Life team and a bit of good fortune that helped a masterful driver complete a checkered racing season.
I think 83 was the last of the really keen head-to-head type deal. Now, he won the championship again a couple years after that, but we weren't head-to-head competitors again, but we had been in 81 and 82 and again in 83. And we got to Riverside for the final race in 83, and I started having all kinds of trouble. We had flat tires, and the engine started running poorly. And the fuel pressure, we started having trouble with the fuel pressure. And, you know, it looked like I was going to yet give another national championship to Darrell Waltrip. I think I had to finish like within 10 places of him to keep the win. But between the flat tires now, and the road course, you know, is more than a couple miles around. And so you could have a pit stop and you didn't lose a lap. You know, you just fell way back. Well, I had a flat tire, and then I had another flat tire, and I was a lap behind. And Darrell Waltrip is going to win this championship again. And I raced Benny Parsons back to the flag. Benny became the leader, and there was a caution, and I raced him back to the flag and got my lap back. Right after that, my engine started running very poorly. And it was caused by the fuel pressure fluctuate. And, you know, I was just beside myself. You know, not only is the guy way in front of me, but my car won't even run right. I've had these flats, and now I'm putting up with a fuel pressure problem. The checker flag came down. We had a rainstorm that was unbelievable. We couldn't even have our celebration for winning the championship. We did, to a degree anyway, got in under the garage area and had our signs and, you know, all the stuff that Miller had gotten ready just in case. And we had a pretty good celebration anyway, but, you know, I thought of all the things that had happened all year long, and then to have a day like that and to almost lose that thing again, it really was, it gave it extra special meaning.
In many ways, the down then up year personifies the story of a young man who became a champion.
Bobby was voted most popular driver 7 times, and back then the balloting was done by NASCAR members. To be a driver, a mechanic, car owner, whatever, you have to have a NASCAR license, join NASCAR, and become a member. And to me, that's the ultimate compliment when your peers in the sport vote you the most popular driver. Everybody, even the people that had run-ins with Bobby, still respected Bobby. And I'm glad the fans are voting for most popular driver now, but to me it means more to know that the people that make their living doing this stuff 365 days a year voted Bobby most popular driver 7 years.
Then came the ultimate in the life and racing career of Bobby Allison. A victory in the 1988 Daytona 500 with his son Davey Allison crossing the finish line just behind him. For the Miller High Life team and its star, it was just that, High Life at its ultimate level.
My positioning of Davey and his activities are a lot of fondness coupled to a youngster that I felt really responded to my input. You know, Davey was my buddy when he was a little bitty guy. And, you know, we had days when things didn't go just right, and had a day or two where, you know, where Davey needed to get his, you know, his little punishment or whatever. But still, my relationship even today is a father and son deal that every father would really love to have. And lots of fathers would give all kinds of everything if they could have maybe one day of it.
That is putting goosebumps on me now just thinking about it. Man, that's by far the all-time greatest memory that I'll ever have. It very well could be the last Winston Cup race that my dad ever won. And I finished second to him that day. I wanted to beat him just as bad as I wanted to beat everybody else, all the way up until that checkered flag fell. And I've been accused of letting off and letting him go, but I can assure you that he didn't raise me that way, and I would never do that. I would never let somebody else win a race, no matter who they were, if I had a chance to win it. But now, the way things turned out after that, looking back on it, if I could go back and change that race, I wouldn't. There's not enough money in the world and no feeling in the world that could ever take that place. And once I got to second place, I knew that I had to make the move at exactly the right time on the racetrack if I was going to be able to pass him. And I never gave in to the fact that I was beat until when I made the move to the inside and watched him accelerate away. I knew then that it was all over with and I better get back in line and protect second place. But I did pull up alongside of him going into turn 3, and at that point I still felt I had a chance. But I mean, it's just like he saw me out of the corner of his eye and he just accelerated right on back away.
Through the hard times in his life, he kept going round and round. But those high banks he soared.
Bobby Allison has never run from the hard times in his life. But in 1971, with sponsors sparse for his auto racing effort, he thought about leaving the Winston Cup circuit.
We're walking down through the infield area, and Ralph Moody is sitting there in his motorhome and says to me, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm leaving. You know, we're going, I'm taking Donnie Dendy, and I'm going to go back to Alabama and run my short track stuff." Well, he said, "You ought to drive for me." And I said, "Well, I'm available." And with that, I walked on away. Took Donnie Dendy, really had a tough trip. You know, I was down in the dumps and, you know, was feeling bad about things not going well and about having made the decision to quit the deal, and finally had to stop at Bristol on the way to Indy and go in the men's room and throw up. I mean, you know, had made myself that sick that day stewing about that. Went on to Indy, was messing around with Donnie there, and got a phone call from Ralph Moody. Ralph Moody said, "I got the car for Talladega, and I need you to, you know, to come and help us get the final preparation, take it to Talladega." Was incredibly good news for me.
But he stuck it out, basically because of a runner-up finish to his brother Donnie Allison at Talladega that year. That enabled stock car racing to keep a colorful character, a genuine scrapper. And if you doubt that, ask Cale Yarborough, who saw a fiery side of Bobby Allison after he and Donnie Allison bumped each other out of a race in Daytona.
I was a couple laps behind, and to finish the race and get credit for where I was ahead of them still at the time, and so the white flag was still out when I came by, and I went around and took the checker flag and then came back and stopped at the scene. I could see Donnie was okay, he was out of his car and so forth, but the crowd was already beginning to fill in around him. So I pulled up and hollered to Donnie, "Donnie, do you want to ride back to the pit area, to the garage area?" And, you know, with that, Cale ran up saying I had caused the wreck. Well, I was, you know, several hundred feet in front of him, and I was quite sure that I hadn't caused that particular wreck by any means, but ran up to a few feet away from me hollering that I had caused the wreck. And I gave him some sort of an answer and kind of looked away, and with that he hit me in the face with his helmet. And he backed away from the car when he did that, and I looked down, the blood was running down my suit, and I said to myself, I have either got to get out of the car and address this thing right now, or I have to run from Cale Yarborough the rest of my life. And so I unhooked, took my seat belts loose, climbed out of the car and climbed on top of Cale. Now, the pictures kind of show the thing, kind of indicate Donnie is involved. But Donnie came up, and it shows him with his helmet back. Some of the prominent pictures you still see, you see Donnie with his helmet back. But what he's saying to Cale, I can hit you with my helmet too. You know, why'd you hit Bobby with your helmet? I can hit you with my helmet too. Pretty early in the thing, and I'll say this, my version, I got a couple of pretty good punches in on Cale. Then he kicked me, and I grabbed his foot and lost my balance, and I went to the ground with his foot, but the foot was not a weapon anymore. You know, I held on to it. The pictures look like that hurt me or that did me some damage. It did not, but I just lost my balance and went down. And you know, then a bunch of people came up and grabbed everybody, and there was no more fight. But it was certainly some activity, some excitement over there.
And turning back to rival Richard Petty, there is another disappointment in the life of Bobby Allison that he almost alleviated under unusual circumstances. He almost won at Martinsville in a strange car.
I can tell you one kind of cute story about the Petty operation, probably more than about Richard personally. But Richard went through a period there where his health was kind of crummy, and he used a lot of relief drivers. And one day we're at Martinsville, and I had fallen out of the race early, and Richard needed a relief driver. So they came and got me, and I got in for him. Well, I could not believe this car. We're 2 laps down, but this thing runs fast, and the brakes work really good, and it turns the corner really good. And so, in a little while, I made up one of the laps. And a little longer, I made up the other lap. And I'm going to win this race in Richard Petty's car. And the caution came out. And of course, all the cars dove in the pits to get fresh tires. And so I dove in the pits to get fresh tires too. And the crew chief walked up to the window and said, "We're not going to give any fresh tires, just go finish the race." And so I drove out of the pit. You know, when you're in that kind of a thing, your thinking never goes to the idea of why is this going on. You know, I must go race and I must go do the best I can. And so back out on the racetrack I went, and I finished second. If I would have had probably today's attitude when they said, "We're not going to give you tires," I would have said, "Drive it your own self."
It never mattered what the details on his car said. Green flags to check, but not the yellow and red. You could always count on a pedal push.
One thing about Bobby Allison, he could get himself into some interesting predicaments on the racetrack. Thank goodness he can laugh about infamous rival Curtis Turner from the early years and a well-known crew chief from the modern era who he often disobeyed with good reason, like he did to get victories in California and Michigan.
Curtis showed up, and I wondered if he was totally sober, whatever. But I qualified good. I qualified on the outside pole, I believe, and the race started. I got in traffic, and in the traffic, Curtis caught me and spun me out. Well, my normal attitude back in those days was you don't wait a lap and even the score, but if I run him down, if I do run him down and catch him, then he better give me room. If he doesn't give me room, then I better even the score. It took about 100 laps to catch him, but I did run him down and catch him. But he decided he wasn't going to give me any room, and so I gave him a little push. And that made him give me a little push back. And then I gave him another little push. And then he gave me a little bit bigger push, so I gave him a little bit bigger push. And the next thing you know, we were out in the infield, going around the infield. And in fact, I gave him the little push and got away from him, and he came across the infield and pushed me into the guardrail pretty hard. And then we got to beating and banging on each other down the infield, and finally got where neither car would move. And we were both out of the race. They finally went on with the race, and they drug our cars out of the way. The first race season, we're on the front row. Once again, I'm not sure whether it's a pole or outside. We start the pace lap, and the car is vibrating terrible. And I can tell that something's wrong. Most likely, the universal joint on the drive shaft is not properly positioned in the rear end. And so I radioed to the crew, there's something wrong, got to come in, you got to check it. The crew chief tells me not to come in. But one of the other mechanics has a radio on where he can hear. I don't think he could talk, but he could hear. And so I come in, I say, I'm coming in anyway, something's really bad wrong. And so I come into the pit area, they jack the car up, and yes, he could talk because he says, I see the problem, I'll have it fixed in a minute. Fixed the problem. We started last in the race. Took a while to get to the lead, but we got the lead, and we went on and won the race at Riverside. But it became a confrontation because I was told to stay on the racetrack by the crew chief, and I came in the pits anyway. Now, it didn't matter that they did find exactly what I was afraid of, and had we not found it, I am totally sure that the car would have failed very quickly, and we'd have been out of the race. Now we're at Michigan, and we're really running very poorly. It was a few laps to go, and there was a giant crash on the back straightaway, and I missed it. It took all the cars in front of me and a few of the ones immediately behind me out of the race. And as I came around and the caution came out, the crew chief started to holler, pit this lap. And I waited until I got a chance to open my mic and say, we just won the race. Nobody else made it through the wreck. We won the race. We're behind the caution car. We got a few laps to go. We're not going to have a restart. We won the race. And he said to me, I'm running these pits, and I said to pit. Well, I was really disappointed that, you know, that our communication was still so bad that I couldn't say that we won the race and, you know, let's be happy about that. I stayed on the track and indeed took the checker flag, and we went on to victory lane.
We got a spin back on the backstretch. A spin back on the backstretch. The caution flag will wave as Ken Schrader and Jeff Bodine will race
Bobby
back
Allison.
to the flag.
When the Miller High Life car driven by Bobby Allison lost air in a tire and spun out of control during the first lap of the Miller High Life 500 at Pocono in 1988, the yellow flag was frozen by fear. Most everybody knew the man who had won the Daytona 500 a few months earlier had been injured severely.
Didn't see it happen, so I don't know. I didn't know how serious it was. Then as we rode around the racetrack and it took longer and longer to get him out of the car, he started to think, man, you know, maybe he might be hurt pretty badly. And then the reports were coming in that he was. And that was frightening and sad.
Davey Allison was another who knew Bobby Allison would have to fight for his life.
I can tell you right now, it's not difficult to talk about because I have the opportunity to talk to him every day, or just about every day. And because of that, looking back on those times, it's a lot easier to accept. But when I came around that racetrack and saw the caution flag waving, there was just something that told me that my dad was involved. I just had that feeling, and before Robert Yates ever even mentioned it to me, I was prepared to hear that he was involved in the wreck. And he came over the radio and told me to be prepared that it was a bad one, and to be prepared for what I was going to see when I got back there. And even though I knew in some way that he was involved, it was good that Robert told me what he did, because that enabled me to accept it before I got there, that I wasn't going to like what I saw, and to be prepared for it. When I drove up alongside that car, I knew that it was bad. I could see my dad sitting in there with his head slumped over and that he was unconscious. And the safety workers were already there, and one of them was screaming at me to get out of there, that I was in their way. And I couldn't get his attention to come over to the window, and went around and made another lap under the caution behind the pace car. Got back over and stopped again, and the guy came back the second time, and again he was yelling at me to get out of there, and I kept motioning for him to come over to the window, that I needed to know what was going on and how the situation stood, so that I could relay the message back to the pit so they could tell my mother, you know, and so they could tell my dad's guys what was going on. And there was a lot more involved than just for my own information going on right there. And I could see that they were working on him pretty hard inside, and each time I saw that, you know, I could see that it was not getting any better right at that point. And I took off again, and when I came back the third time, the guy finally came over to the window and he says, "Why do you keep stopping here? You're in our way," and all this stuff. And I grabbed a hold of him and pulled him down the window net, and I said, "Listen, that's my dad in that car, and I want to know what's going on now." And then he took off and went and got the information. It didn't dawn on him to who I was up until that point.
While everybody knew his racing days were over, Bobby Allison fought hard to recover, at first in Pennsylvania and then in Alabama. Meanwhile, members of his family prayed.
When you look back after this length of time, it's always a little bit different than it was when it really happened and everything, you know. But it was really traumatic in the aspect that it took them so long to get him out of the car. And in that fact alone, you know that something is really badly wrong. And then once we were at Allentown and went to the hospital, and they found that he had the head injury and he needed to have an operation immediately and stuff like that, you know, it was even more traumatic. And, you know, I didn't want him to be a vegetable. I knew he didn't want to be, you know, and I didn't want him to be. And the doctor told me that he would give me back my husband, and I think that he's done that.
The prayers were answered, and old Stoker made it, initially showing his stubborn demeanor at Lakeshore Hospital in Birmingham.
When they brought me home, I was conscious, but I still wasn't hooked up. And it was almost 3 weeks later, the day that I woke up there laying in that bed at Lakeshore, and where am I and what has gone wrong and why do I hurt so bad? And you know, laying there trying to get myself together and not having any idea of what city I was in, or even worse, what year it was. You know, what city or state or what year. I didn't have any information. I somehow knew that I was a race car driver, and I knew that Judy was my wife. You know, and really, really was confident that here I am, and I'm somewhere unknown, but my wife, who is my best friend, is here with me. And I figure out from here what we do. I laid there in that bed, and I said, I got to get out of here. You know, I'm here against my wishes, so I got to get out of here. And I worked my way between the rails and the bed. It was a bed that had the side rails on it, typical hospital bed, you know. Worked my way through the rails, got out, right foot out on the floor, put my left foot out on the floor, and my broken left leg gave way, and I fell. And boy, I said, man, I can't let anybody know this went on. I got to get back in that bed and figure out where I am. And worked my way back in that bed, and I laid there and I said, I got to figure this thing out. I'm here against my wishes. They've got Judy fooled, and they broke my leg to keep me here. And I'm telling you, you know, it's so much fun to say it now because I survived it, I guess. But it is so funny. But at the time, it was so incredibly bad. You know, I was at a total loss. Somehow I decided that I was right, I do need to get out of here. So I'll work my way out of this bed again. But there's that little dresser there, and I'll hold on to it to balance myself because I got this broken leg. I worked my way out of the bed again, and I reached out for the little dresser, and it was on wheels. And away it went, and down I went again. Well, I didn't try to crawl back a minute. A little of the real me still existed. I landed on that floor, and I laid there, and I said, they got me here, they can come pick me up. I'll lay here and holler. So I laid there yelling.
At Lakeshore Hospital, superstar race driver Bobby Allison drew inspiration from the battles being waged by other patients, who in turn drew inspiration from him.
From that day at Lakeshore, that, you know, they had the classes that you go to, the therapy sessions that you go to, and they do the kind of things that help whatever the injury happened to be. And Lakeshore was incredibly good for me because they really worked on what my problems were, but on top of that, I could look around Lakeshore, and there were a lot of people there, and there were some badly hurt people there. But I could look around that hospital, and I could say, that guy's better than he was yesterday. And that guy's better than he was yesterday. So I must be getting better. It was an incredible encouragement to me, incredibly good encouragement to me. And the work of the entire staff at Lakeshore was very good, but just the confidence that I was able to get through seeing other people recovering was really great. Motorsports team that's based in Charlotte, North Carolina is involved in this ultra-competitive, ultra-professional situation that Winston Cup racing has become. I hope that we really can continue to progress, that we can figure out what we need to do to win races. And the way I look at things, once we learn how to win races, then we should start thinking about how to win the championship.
At first blush, it appears life has slowed down a bit for Bobby Allison, but he continues to make a strong impact on auto racing as owner of the Ray Bestis team car, which is also sponsored by Tic Tac and Meineke. At Bobby Allison Motorsports headquarters in Charlotte, he works with top-of-the-line technicians in a first-class environment to help the car become more competitive. At the racetrack, he remains an admired figure who always has time for the fans.
One of the really nice guys in racing. One of the guys that worked to get where he is and appreciates it and probably knows racing better from every aspect. I really believe that Bobby could get in a room by himself. You could turn the light out and he could put a car together with the parts there on the floor without any light at all. I think he's that good.
In the garage area and elsewhere, Bobby Allison is a superb ambassador for his sponsors.
So many of my friends can grab that little Tic Tac and say, boy, I'm going to have one of these little Tic Tacs. And they're helping Bobby, but they taste good.
On pit road, Bobby Allison is often found working closely with a Ray Bestis Meineke Tic Tac driver. No doubt Hut Strickland learned a lot from the master in the 90s, as another famous driver has for many, many years.
You know, I can look back on the days when I started racing, when I actually started driving race cars, and I was working for him, and there were a lot of things that he wanted done in a certain way that sometimes maybe I felt like I had learned a better way and had learned a quicker way and had learned a way to make it a little bit nicer looking without using up more time, you know, just out of experience. And I would make a suggestion and he'd say, that's not the way I want it done. And he would say, I want it done this way, and that's my way. And it was hard for me to accept that at that point, because I was a young, rebellious guy with an ambition to go on and do things the best I possibly could and as quick as I possibly could and still have it look nice. You know, so here's this sort of an ego thing over here that I've got, and here's a guy over here that knows what's going on and knows why he wants this done a certain way, but I couldn't see that then. And I look back on it now and I think, man, you know, what he told me back then, even if I could have gone and done these things the easy way and had the same results from it, the thought wouldn't still be in my head like it is now. That's why he made me do it the hard way, and that's why it was the best way.
Well, anytime or anywhere people could walk up and, Bobby, can I have your autograph? He could be eating dinner, or, you know, no matter what was going on, he would always take the time to spend with the fans, and, you know, to please the fans. And when I first started realizing what was going on, most of the drivers wouldn't do that. You know, they just kind of flicked the fans off or sign one or two, and that was enough. But as long as there was somebody standing there, you know, he would take care of them. Now, most of the drivers do that, and very few of them will turn a fan down. And, you know, they realize that the fans is what's paying their salary, and they got to keep them happy.
Starting in the 6th position, from Hueytown, Alabama, Bobby Allison.
It was hot that night, and he was feeling bad. Got him out of the car and set him in a chair, and finally had to work the chair around to a fence where at least he could get a little air from behind, because it was swamped with people so bad. Darrell Waltrip won the race, and there was maybe 100 people at Victory Lane. The rest of them were over at the fence getting autographs from Dad. And, you know, he was having a tough time breathing, so we got him around to, you know, at least to get the fence to block part of them out, because it was just swamped. And we were the last ones to leave that night too.
From real early on, I think his personal happiness was just really evident. It was always something that was really noticeable to me, by me, but also by a lot of other people. You know, they could tell that Clifford just had that little bit of extra pleasure about him. You know, he was always hunting a little something to do, or maybe to pull a little joke on somebody, or do something funny just to make somebody laugh. And you didn't dare get around him when you didn't want to laugh, because if he noticed that was going on, then he would really pursue you and finally get you to laugh, no matter how bad things were on a given day.
It looked like finally, you know, Clifford's thing was taking off, and so it's now over. It's real hard. Of course, he's won the best race of all of us, and at least that's the way we feel about it. And it's left a definite void in all of our lives, in me, because in bearing children, they're part of you, you know, and it's like one piece, one chunk of you is just gone, you know.
The whole 92 season has been a little bit less pleasure than I had hoped it would be. And then there have been some hard times. You know, we've lost Pop. I had one little setback in my own physical situation, and then Davey got hurt, and then this with Clifford. And I really don't know the magic words to make it right with everybody, but I really believe that God has a reason for what goes on, and that someday I will know the answer, and in the meantime, that I just have to do the best I can do every day.
Doing things the hard way and the best way has led Bobby Allison to victory lane many times. Maybe that is why he continues to spend race days with his gaze fixed on the lead pack, while remembering being a front runner himself for more than 3 decades.
I think his legacy in racing would be, if I was going to in my opinion, a great driver, a great mechanic, a great gentleman, great Christian, a teacher who was willing to share his knowledge with the rest of the motorsports world, and a person that was willing to be in a leadership role and lead, but have everybody as part of the team. I think that was what I would imagine a Bobby Allison would leave as a legacy in our sport.
The thing that I feel that I noticed really early on about racing was that if a small fellow or a woman or an old person couldn't throw a pass or couldn't shoot a basket or couldn't hit a baseball, they still could drive that car. And so many of them, including my next door neighbor right here, would say, I could beat that guy. You know, I'll just step on the gas a little bit and I'll get in front of that guy instead of getting behind him. And so I felt that all people could relate to racing.
I feel that Bobby was one of those that made racing above what it had been in the beginning, made it a much more respectable sport.
He got started under the shade of a tree at a time when he was young. He was determined to become a champion, a racing hero, cars they built to run. Early on his mother offered objections, forcing him to use a fictitious name. But the world soon knew Bobby Allison as the leader of the Alabama gang.
His father said, now son, if you're gonna race, you gotta be the best. Bobby nodded his approval. He told Pop he had passed the test.
Bobby Allison drove fast and hard, taking on the king in court.